All right, class, let's start. So this lecture is for September 29, and we'll go over chapter 9. So basically, it's all about stock valuation. So if you have taken investment class or if you're taking current investment class, so you see some similar things, similar topics. But the good thing is that these are really some exciting and cool stuff, and this is really, really important to know if you want to learn finance. So hopefully next week on Tuesday, we'll meet in person in a regular class time in 1404. And today I'm planning to make the class a little short so that next Tuesday when we start in-person classes, if you have any questions for these last two lectures, like recorded lectures, feel free to raise your hand. We'll go over and try to fix things. Okay, let's start. So our major objective is to talk about stock valuations, equity valuations. So before we talk about that, let's think about what is equity. Pause the video and think like, what is equity? So if you think about equity, we basically can say it gives us an ownership claim on the asset, right? It gives us an ownership claim on the asset. And now when we think about stock, what kind of stocks are there? Like we all know common stocks are there. Like is there anything else? Yes, it is. Basically, there are two different type of stocks. One is called preferred stock and the other is called common stocks. They're same, any differences? There are a lot of differences between common and preferred stock, but let's talk about very specific some specific characteristics. So basically, if you own a preferred stock versus if you own a common stock, one of the major important difference, common stock, you have voting rights. Preferred stock, you have no voting rights. So that's one of the most important difference between common and preferred stock. Okay. Another important difference, if you own preferred stock, you are always entitled for fixed dividend, like the way bondholders got fixed interest. If you own common stock, it's not a fixed dividend. Depending on management payout policy, your dividend will be different, but it's not a fixed guaranteed dividend like, preferred stock. Another final difference, if you own preferred stock, in liquidation, in bankruptcy, for preferred stock owner, you will be paid before common stockholder. But if you own common stock, you are the least, you got the residual claim. So these are some common differences. So basically, when we talk about valuation, we mostly concerned about common stock valuation. We are not concerned about preferred stock valuation mostly, but out of those different methodologies, different valuation techniques we discussed today, there is one valuation technique we can use for preferred stock valuation. Again, we mostly concerned about common stock valuation, not preferred stock, but one could be used for preferred stock valuation. Now, when you talk about valuation, what we actually mean? We are trying to talk about some techniques, some methodologies that help us to know what really the worth of that instrument. So basically, I want to generalize the concept. So basically, when I say instrument about security, I mean it could be stock, it could be bonds, right? So any financial assets. So the idea is if you want to value one financial asset, we're actually trying to find out what is the real worth of that asset or stock. And valuation models, valuation methods are trying to find out the real value of that asset or instrument, right? And in finance, if we talk about value, we basically talk about present value of all the future cash flows. We basically talk about present value of all the future cash flows. So in finance, the intuition is asset will generate cash flows in the future. So if asset generates cash flow in the future, if we discount them back today, so basically this is the present value of all the expected cash flows. Okay, so if this is true, there are two broad valuation techniques. When it comes to stock, we basically think about two broad valuation techniques. They are known as absolute valuations and relative valuation. How they are different? Absolute valuation mainly deals about discounting the expected cash flows, which is the generalized definition of valuation, right? Or value. Relative valuation, it tries to value one company, one stock as compared to peer or the industry. So basically, they try to find out a peer firm that is very, very comparable to your stock, your firm. And based on that, it try to measure some ratios and try to value the corporations. So we will go over it. We'll go over more on these topics. Okay. So now let's move on to absolute valuation. Let's talk about a little bit about absolute valuation, what it really means. So when you talk about absolute valuation, the generalized definition is to think about future cash flows and discount it back today. So that means if we want to formalize, if we want to find a formula for that, things should be like that. Future cash flows and discounting back today, right? In terms of stocks, what are some good examples of future cash flows? Some good examples of future cash flows are dividend and free cash flow to equity, right? Right. So two good examples of future cash flows. So in that sense, we have to predict dividends and free cash flow to equity. Then we have to find out a appropriate discount rate to discount all back today to get the price. We'll talk about more about these specific components. For the relative valuation, this is also known as comparable valuation technique, also known as comparable valuation technique. So in these methods, in this policy, we have to find out a measure, a proxy, in this method, we have to find out a measure or a proxy of a peer firm or a comparable firm or in that industry so that we can get a value. So we'll have examples and that gonna make the definition, the scenario more clear. Now elaborate these things a little bit. So I believe we are kind of like certain that what are future cash flows, future dividends, free cash flow equity. And in finance, we are not concerned about past. We are not concerned about past cash flows, like not past dividends, past free cash flow equity. What we concerned about future. So in that regard, past variable information like past dividend, past free cash flow equity, we can easily get this information from company statements. From there, we have to predict future. How can we predict future? We have to find an appropriate growth rate. So basically, from the past, if we can find an appropriate growth rate, we can predict the future. In the last part of this lecture, we'll talk about how to get the growth rate. So ideally, we know we can get the dividend information from a statement. So basically on the test, on the midterm, on the homework, your past information will be given. Now, when it comes to getting a growth rate, excuse me, when it comes to getting growth rate, we'll talk about it. The most important thing. So the next most important thing is basically discount rate. So when you talk about discount rate, and we actually try to do stock valuation, you have to know some alternative names too. If we talk about discount rate, so that is basically same thing. If you talk about discount rate, that is basically same thing for required return on equity. Same thing. So don't get confused on the test. This is also noted by R. Required return equity is noted by R. This is also known as cost of equity, noted by K. So don't get confused. Sometimes the more appropriate notation is basically, if we go to equation, so if you go here, so the more appropriate notation is basically RE. Make sense? That's the more appropriate notation, but same thing. And here also, the more appropriate notation is KE, cost of equity. So basically they're same thing. If I say discount rate, required rate of return on equity, RE, cost of equity, KE, same thing. So know those alternative names, know those synonyms. So now I think we are kind of familiar with the basic structure, like cash flows. In practice, we should know few past cash flows. If we have the information of past cash flows, and if you know the growth rate, we can know next year cash flows. We'll talk about growth rate soon. Then about discount rate. Discount rate, we can get it, we can calculate it, can estimate it from CAPM model. We'll talk about CAPM model after midterm too. So right now we'll assume discount rate will be given. It is as it is. Okay, so if now it's gone, discount rate is also known as required rate of return on equity, which is RE, or cost of equity, KE. Okay, now we are talking about dividend discount methods or dividend discount models. So basically there are three different methods for dividend discount modeling or dividend discount methods. In short, it is also called DDM. So there are three different. The first one is known as zero growth. Second one is known as constant growth. Third one is known as differential or multi-stage growth models. So zero growth, constant growth, differential, or multi-stage growth models. So basically in zero growth models, it is assumed that your dividend is a constant amount for each year. So zero growth is a constant or fixed dividend amount for each year. So if a company pays $5 last year, that means it will pay $5 next year. Keep doing so forever. So zero growth, constant amount of dividend will be paid each year. On the constant growth model, it is assumed that the dividend will grow at a certain rate, at a fixed rate forever, maybe like 2% forever. So if the company paid $5 last year, next year should be 5 times 1.02. After that, it should be 5 times 1.02 to the power 2. So basically, the dividend each year will grow by 2% from the last year. So the growth rate is constant, not the dividend amount. Make sense? On the differential or multi-stage model, it is assumed that there are some initial number of years. On those years, there is a higher growth rate for the dividend. After that, dividend will grow at a constant rate forever. So basically, the differential or multi-stage growth models, you can separate the entire model into two different models. So separate the entire models into two different models. Higher growth years, constant growth years. So we will go. So we'll talk about it. And so the idea is dividend will grow at a higher rate for maybe next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. After that, a constant rate forever. So basically, after the higher growth period, this is basically taking this model. So it's a combination of constant growth models and high growth dividends. So now, this is the model that you can use to value preferred stock. These are two models you can use to value common stock, Although we are more concerned about common stock, but yeah, there is a model that can be used to value preferred stock. Now, thinking about formula. So here, price 0, which means price today, is basically a function of this dividend over discount rate. So discount rate could be R, could be K, whatever you want to use. So now you can be concerned like, hey, in finance, we only concerned about expected cash flows, future cash flows. Shouldn't be dividend 1. So the trick is in a zero growth model, which means constant or fixed dividend for future entire year, your dividend 0 is basically equal to your dividend 1. So if the company paid $5 last year and there is no growth, there should be $5 next year too, and forever. So in a zero growth model, the dividend is fixed or constant. So last year dividend is equal to next year. So doesn't matter. So this formula should work fine. And another thing is that if you go back to the chapters when you talk about time value of money, annuity, perpetuity, real think about the formulas. When you try to find the present value of perpetuity, this is the same formula we used. This is the same formula where we use cash flow divided by R. Here we're using dividend divided by discount rate. Same thing. So basically, zero growth model for preferred stock is kind of fixed amount of cash flow, fixed amount of dividend, whatever. Now moving on to constant growth model. Here price is a function of, now I have to fix this. Oops. So here price is a function of dividend 1. And then from discount rate, I have to subtract growth rate. So now on constant growth model, price today is a function of dividend next year, make sure. So here's the thing, we don't consider or don't concern about last year dividend, we concern about next year dividend. So on the numerator, next year dividend, dividend 1, on the denominator, discount rate minus growth rate. Right now we are assuming discount rate will be given, growth rate will be given, so it's fine. But dividend for next year dividend, it could be given, but if it's not given, then it's a pretty easy formula. So the formula is one plus make sense? So in the test, in the midterm, if it's last year dividend, make sure multiply with the growth rate. If it's next year dividend, you are safe, just plug in the value, but make sure like what year is it for, is it the dividend for next year or is the dividend for last year? So make sure that. So if you're good so far, let's have some small examples, method 1 and method 2. Then we can move on to method 3, which is kind of a little complex. So we talked about that. We talked about here. This is the zero growth models. We talked about that. And then here is a basic formula. Sorry, basic example. Firm pays 50 cents dividend each year starting next year. So same thing. So zero growth model, right? Discount rate 15%. Look at the equation. 50 cents over 15%, 3.33. Now constant growth model, dividend next year over discount rate minus growth rate, right? Firm just paid 50 cents. That means last year, D0, dividend 0, expected to grow at 5% each year, discount rate 15%. What is the price of that stock? So we have to find next year dividend, 15 minus 5. Same formula. So pause the video, think about the formula of method 1 and method 2, which is zero growth and constant growth. Then look at these quick examples. You should be good. Look at this quick example, should be good. So now moving on to differential growth. So in differential growth, this is a formula from the book. You guys are welcome to use that, but I don't recommend using that, and I never use that. So I have some like easy trick formulas that could be helpful, that could be better to find the current price or current value of stock when there is a multi-stage growth rate. So basically my idea is split time period into two different segments: higher growth, constant growth. So now, how can we make sure, how can we split? So basically, you have to think about the example first. So basically, if the test, the problem say that the company will experience 10% growth for the next 3 years. After that, it will grow 5% constant forever. So 10% in the next 3 years, 5% constant forever. So that means year 1, year 2, year 3, high growth years. So 10% growth rate, 3 years, high growth years. After that, constant. So basically, 4 and onwards, constant. So on that case, your 1, 2, 3, higher growth years, constant growth years. So anything before constant growth years is higher growth years. Okay. Now, on that triggered, what we have to do? We have to specifically predict D1, specifically predict D2, D3, now D4. Now, if you look, the constant growth model, it said for D1, if you discount by discount rate minus growth, you got a P0. On that sense, if you discount D4 by discount rate minus growth rate, you will get a P3. So basically, your P3 is a function of D4 divided by A minus. Make sense? So ideally, I repeat, higher growth years. I said 10% growth for the first 3 years, higher growth years. From D4, constant forever. So you have to find out when the constant started. Before that, until that, higher growth. So if you have constant growth started and discounted by discount rate minus growth rate, you got year back price, okay, which is P3 here. Now you have the specific dividends or specific cash flows and these specific cash flows. Now discount all back to P0 by the discount rate. Now let's do an example, then it should be fine. It should be fine. It's not that complicated. Read this example very carefully. Just paid a dividend of $2. That means last year, 0. Dividend is expected to grow 8% for 3 years. So that means first 3 years, higher growth years. Then 4% forever. That means year 4 to onwards, 4%. Discount rate, 12%. What is the stock price? So now, if we want to do this problem, okay, our first job is to summarize information, okay? If you want to summarize information, see carefully. First 3 years, higher growth years, constant growth years. That's first summarization of information, right? Second important information is given, which is dividend is given, right? Now let's summarize growth rate. Because on the problem it said 8% for 3 years, then 4% forever. So right? Okay. If we summarize all information, right? We know higher growth years, constant growth years. Now our job is you have to find out four cash flows. Four cash flows. D1, D2, D3 for higher growth cash flows. D1, D2, D3 higher growth cash flows. Then from year 4, it's a constant years, constant growth models. So that means based on dividend 4, we will get a P3. So now let's forecast dividend 1. Let's see that. $2 times makes sense. Makes sense. Now we should get something future price. So basically, if you look carefully, 2.62 is your dividend 4. Discount rate 12% minus 4% growth rate. When you use constant model, like when you trying to find the future price for your constant period, make sure you're using the constant growth, not the higher growth. I repeat, constant growth, not the higher growth. So that's it. So now these four are your relevant cash flows. Now you have to discount all back today and get the price. One important cautions. This is your P3, so it should be discounted by year 3, not year 4, okay? So it should be discounted like a year 3 cash flows. This is your P3, should be discounted as a year 3 cash flow, not year 4. Be careful with that. So now we discount rate. Find the present value of each cash flows. Look at here. So dividend 1, $2.16 discounted back. Dividend 2. So on year 3, we have dividend 3 and a P3. I sum them together, now discounting back today, okay? Price is basically sum of make sense? Let's go back to slide. They got the same price. Maybe in smaller steps, but you need to memorize those formulas. Okay. So quick recap one final time. Predict these three cash flows and find the price. Easy to predict these three cash flows. Now based on this dividend 4, we got a P3, discount all back together, we got the price. Make sense? Okay, now moving on. Sample questions. So go through the sample questions, pause the video, solve these sample questions. They're really, really easy to solve. Okay. So let me share you the answer for these sample questions. So if I go to here, let's do here. So basically, okay. So let's go back and let's think. So basically, 70% discount rate, okay? Stock pays 1.2 in dividend every year. Stock pays 1.2 dividend every year. That means zero growth or fixed dividend model, right? Pretty easy solution. 70% discount rate, year zero, fixed dividend. That's it. Dividend divided by price, right? Okay. Now, just paid 1.2 in dividend. That means last year grows by 8% annually forever. Constant growth model. So it should be D1 divided by discounted minus growth rate. On that case, D0 just paid. D1 is D0 times 8%. Let's see if I delete this, what gonna happen? Okay. So D1 divided by 17% minus 8%. Okay. Just paid $1.2 dividend. That means last year grows by 9% for 5 years, then 11% forever. So basically, you have to predict 5 dividends, dividend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 dividends. And then from year 6, this is constant growth. So basically based on D6, you will get a P5 and then discount all back together. Just paid. So D0 times 9%, D1 times 9%, D2 times 9%, right? Now this is D6. This is 11%, okay? Now based on this D6, you are getting P5, okay. Discounting all today. This is just the D5 and this is P5. So now, let's see. If you sum everything, you want the price today. Now, problem 2 is quite intuitive. So I want to put this for yourself. So try to do it by yourself. On the next class, we'll talk about it, okay? On the next class, let me know what you got, and we'll talk about it. It's pretty easy, but it's quite intuitive. So you do it by yourself. Now going back to our earlier discussion. So basically, we are talking about for example, in a dividend discount model, we always know last year dividend, right? Now, from last year dividend, we have to know the growth rate to think about next year dividend. And discount rate, we can get it from CAPM model, which we will talk about after midterm. So that's why now discount rate will be assumed given. So now for the growth rate, how can we get the growth rate? So basically, there is a theoretical model that actually gives us growth rate. So which is this formula. So basically, growth rate basically is a function of return on equity times retention ratio. So return on equity is pretty simple. I think we always know about that from financial statement analysis. This is how much a corporation earns on its shareholders' equity. So net income or shareholders' equity. Now, what is the retention ratio? So let's elaborate the idea. So when a firm generates some net income, it has two options to do with that. So the firm can distribute everything to the owners, like the stockholders, or the firm can keep it for the future NPV projects. So like it has two options, either distribute or either keep, right? They can do all distributed, all kept, or in between, right? So these are two options, distribution or kept. Whatever they kept is called retained earnings. Whatever they distributed is called dividend payments. So whatever they retained as a percentage of net income is called retention ratio. Whatever they distributed as a percentage of net income is called payout ratio. So basically, let's write these two formulas. So basically, the formulas are like this. Whatever they retain in terms of net income retention, pay it, which is dividend in terms of net income, is payout ratio. And theoretically, summation of these two ratios should be 1. In that regard, we can also write this way. So retention ratio is basically 1 minus payout. So if you know payout, 1 minus payout is a retention. Payout ratio is basically 1 minus retention. If you know retention, 1 minus retention is a payout. So know these relationships, know these terms and definitions. So now if we go to the slide, everything is explained here. So basically, if you want to think about a growth ratio, this is how we can get it. Okay. So everything is described here. Now, if you come here, this is something intuitive. So basically, this is a constant growth models, right? Next year dividend over return on equity minus growth, right? This can be rewritten as this way. So basically, this is your dividend yield plus growth rate. So your return on equity basically dividend yield plus growth rate. So learn this function or formula and do these two problems. Pretty easy problems. Pause the video, do these two problems. So now it said that find out rate of return on the stock, which is return on equity. So basically it said now it's selling on 38.42, dividend next to dividend 1.8, growth rate 4%. So it should be, let's see, it should be, okay, it should be 1.8 slash 38.42. This is your dividend yield, okay? Plus growth rate. That should be problem 1 solution. There should be a rate of return on equity. Second problem. Last year this company paid, okay, this is last year, okay. Next year should be 2.25, okay, and kindly selling for 15.25. So what's the required rate of return, right? So it's simple. There's no growth, okay? Growth is 0. So 2.25 over 15.25. So that should be 2.25 over 15.25. That's it. Some quick recap and some quick fact on dividend discount models. So basically, why we're using dividends, not net income? Basically, in finance, we prefer cash flow, not income. So that's why dividend. Dividend is a cash flow. And second thing is that if any corporations don't pay a dividend, then it's a problem for dividend discount model. What can we do on those situations? We can do relative valuation, we can do free cash flow evaluation, which we'll learn next class. Quick recap, today we learned stock valuation techniques, two broadly techniques, absolute and relative. On absolute, we can do DDM or free cash flow equity method. Today we learned DDM methods. Relative valuation, a lot of different proxies, we'll learn on the next class. From Tuesday, everything is in person. And Tuesday, I'll keep some time so that I can go over if you have any questions for the two recorded lectures. If not, we're good. So that's it. That's all for today. Thank you.